Okay, here we go. We're on 11.4. This one is a little bit long, mostly because it's a whole ton of vocabulary, but other than that, you should be good. So, population is a group of people or objects that you want info about. It's a whole group of people or objects that you want info about. Sample is a subset of the population. So, for example, if our whole population is all of the 11th graders at Lakeville South, our subset of that could be this class. So you're all 11th graders, well, most of you are. 11th graders, you are just a small portion of all of the 11th graders. Just one class of them. Some methods for selecting members of a sample. There's kind of four main different ways that we go about talking about it. Is self-selected, which is also volunteers. You're just choosing yes or no, do I want to be a part of this? Systematic, that is a specific rule. That's used to select people. This one is unbiased. We're going to come back in a second and talk about biased or bias in general, but this way of choosing is unbiased. Specific rule. So if we said every fourth person or every person that is whatever. That's my example. Oh, geez. On the spot. Convenience. Convenience is people that are easiest to reach. So, people that you're like, okay, I want to sample, I want to ask a bunch of people where they want prom to be. I'm just going to ask my 5 friends because they're right here. They're the easiest to reach. That is definitely biased. Random. Random is the ideal way to find something, is where each person has an equally likely chance of being chosen. And this is our best unbiased sample. That is the ideal way of asking about information, is to do random, completely random, where everyone has an equal chance of being chosen. Okay, flip it over. A sports writer wants to survey college baseball coaches about whether they think wooden bats should be mandatory throughout college baseball. Identify the type of sample described. So, first one, a sports writer contacts only the coaches that he has cell phone numbers for in order to get quick responses. That right there is convenience. He's just doing whatever is easiest for him. Who knows, maybe they're all his friends too, and so if he thinks one way, they might think the same way as him. So that's not going to be a good representation of all of the coaches. Sports writer mails out surveys to all coaches and uses only surveys that are returned. So this one is kind of tricky because you'd think it would be a good sample, but this is actually self-selected because they have to mail that back in. The people who don't mail it back in they're not getting their opinion. And maybe it's kind of like when you are at a store and you buy something and they give you that code and they're like, here, call this number, tell us how we did. How many times do people call, they're like, yeah, my service was great. Only if something really bad happens, usually people call. So that is self-selected. Last one says, sports writer contacts and surveys every 5th coach on the list of college baseball coaches. That is systematic. So that is a rule. Every 5th coach he's going to call and ask. Okay, bias versus unbiased. Bias example is an over or under representation. of population. It's either overrepresenting it or it's underrepresenting it. It's not a good job of representing the population. Unbiased represents population well. So you're getting a true scope of all the people that you're going to be asking questions about. Okay, so the manager of a concert hall wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts. The manager asks 50 people standing in line for a rock concert how many concerts per year they attend. Tell whether the sample is biased or unbiased and explain. So that is definitely biased because he's asking people who are already in line to go to a concert how many concerts they go to. Well, they've already proven that they go to concerts because they're there right now. Yeah, so that would be your explanation. This is a convenience sample because he's just asking the people that are right there. Okay. You are a member of the prom committee. You want to poll members of the senior class to find out whether they want to hold the prom, where they want to hold the prom. There are 324 students in the senior class. Describe a way to poll 40 seniors for each of the following methods. So, convenience. You want to ask all these seniors what would be the most convenient way for you to do it. Ask friends. Or the people that are just right next to you. Ask them. First people that seniors that you run into. Random, let's come back to that one. Systematic. So that would be if, say, you get a list of seniors and put a rule together. So, for example, if you get the list of seniors and you're like, oh, I'm going to ask every fourth senior on the list. Every fourth one, I'm going to call them up and ask them. Self-selected, that's if you send out letters to all the seniors and tally responses, or you do a, what would be most convenient right now, like Instagram survey. They have to choose to be a part of it, so they're choosing to answer those things. Random is the best way to do stuff. So random would be, that would be like at a senior class meeting, so everyone is there. You pull names out of a hat. Everyone is there. Everyone has an equally likely chance of being chosen. Okay, that was a lot of vocabulary. Flip it over. We got one last thing to go over. Here we got sample size and margin of error. So sample size, it has to be big enough to accurately represent the population. Must be large enough to represent population. Margin of error, it gives the limit on how much the sample would differ from the population. So sample size, say you want to sample every mom in the United States for a question. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to ask all of the moms, I'm going to pull out the Minnesota list and say you do it correctly and you go through all of just Minnesota, but that's not an accurate representation of the United States because you're only choosing from one state. People in different states, they live different lives. It's a different thing. So that's where we're talking about with sample size. It's got to be big enough and it's got to be expansive so that you are getting the correct people. So margin of error, here's my formula for that, and N is the sample size. If 40% of the people in the poll prefer candidate A and the margin of error is positive and negative 4%, then it is likely that. So that means you're going, if 40% of people prefer that and you're like, okay, well, I could be wrong, there could be some whatever, So it's going to go up 4% and down 4%. So down 4% would be 36, up 4% would be 44. So that means about 36 to 44% of the entire population prefer candidate A. As the sample size increases, the margin of error decreases. So the more people that you ask, the less likely you're going to be wrong. If you only ask 5 people, you're not getting a good representation, so your margin of error is really high. If you ask a ton of people, then you're probably going to be closer to what people actually think. So in a survey of 1,011 people, 52% that said that television is their main source of news. What is the margin of error? You just have to use 1 divided by the square root of 1,011, which you just plug in your calculator, and I got 0.0315, which is 3.15%. So 3.15% is the margin of error that we might be off. So then given that interval, so 52%, so I'm going to do 52 plus 3.15 and 52 minus 3.15. So that gives me a 48.85 to 55.15%. So that's my interval that I'm probably right. Last one. A polling company conducts a poll for U.S. presidential election. How many people did the company survey if the margin of error is 5%? So now they're giving us that. So my margin of error is 5% equals 1 divided by square root n. But that's my 5%. Let me put a percent on there. So 5% is 0.05 equals 1 divided by square root n. To solve this, I'm going to put that over 1 so I can cross multiply. 1 times 1 is 1, so 1 equals 0.05 square root n. Divide by 0.05. So I get 20 equals the square root of n. How do you get rid of a square root? Square it. And n equals 400. So they asked 400 people to have a margin of error of 5%. They asked 400 people. There you go. That's it for 11.4. That was kind of a long one.